I remember the very first day I saw this air pistol. Don't think I'll ever forget it. Welcome back to Canuck Air. What I have here, you should recognize if you know a little bit about air guns. And if you're new to air gunning, this might be a little bit unusual and different. It isn't a collection of plumbing attachments, as it sometimes looks, but is in fact a Webley Senior, which I think for a while there might have been regarded as the finest air pistol available in the world at one point. But as I said, I do remember the very first day that I saw this. My dad was in the local sporting goods shop picking up a few supplies, and I was looking in the case of the used guns because it happened to be right in front of me, and I looked down and I saw this, and I said to my dad, "Hey Dad, there's a Webley here. It's a Senior." And I remember my dad's reaction. He walked up the counter, took a look in the showcase below the glass, and when the fella came over to finalize my dad's bill, my dad said, "Yep, I got everything, and I'll take that." He didn't even ask the price on it. I really don't remember him asking the price. He just simply committed to buying it right then and there. However, I do think the price tag on it, when it was fished out of the display cabinet, was only about $35, which tells you how long ago that was. It would have been sometime in the late 1970s, I think. My dad was pretty eager to buy this, and I can't blame him. One, it is a superb air gun, and he always lovingly talked about how he used to have a Webley Junior, which was the little brother to this one. And he had a Webley Junior when he was a teenager, I imagine, and I always kind of wondered what happened to it. And I did ask him not so long ago why he know what happened to the Webley Junior, and he said as far as he can remember, he sold it to help with some other things to help raise some money to buy my mom's engagement ring. So yeah, he'd been without his beloved Webley Junior for a while there, and when he saw this Webley Senior in the showcase, which he knew this was the prestige model at the time, he knew he had to have it, and can't blame him. This particular Webley Senior is what they call the new model, which was made, I think, from 1935 to 1964. There isn't a serial number on it. It's marked 660 on the end here, but that is just a batch number, apparently. Webley stopped serializing the guns at the beginning of World War II, so after World War II they didn't have serial numbers on them. The closest I can get to dating it is the fact the address here is marked Webley and Scott Limited, Birmingham 4, and that number 4 was dropped after 1958. So definitely sometime 1945 to 1958. That gives you a 13-year window probably of when this gun was made. It is a solid steel construction. The only thing plastic on it is the Bakelite grips on here. Everything else is steel. And when I take it apart, we should be able to see Webley showing off. Inside, instead of a leather or synthetic piston seal, they used bronze piston seals, kind of like piston rings in a car engine. And the assumption was that would give the gun added performance. As it probably turned out, it really didn't all that much, but it was Webley's tour de force at the time. And the interesting thing about this gun, and that every time I see it, because I borrowed this from my dad, of course, and I'll have to give it back to him, it's shocking how small it is. It really is not a very large gun at all. You compare it to other things I have in the cabinet, it dwarfs, most of them dwarf it. Here's a Stoeger XP4 pneumatic pistol, also with a lift-up type barrel face. Of course, this is single-stroke pneumatic and has a big cylinder in there, but there's a cylinder there too. yeah, this is a much smaller gun. This is the kind of thing you could fit in an oversized overcoat pocket. You can't say that about a lot of air guns these days. There is a trigger shoe on this, by the way, in case you noticed. I'd like to remove that, but it seems to be stuck on there. The little tiny Allen screws are, they've been on there a long time. So this gun has a pretty heavy trigger pull. Despite people praising the Webley Senior's trigger pull, I found this to be fairly difficult to shoot well. But I might give another look at that when I pull it all apart and see if there's anything I can do to lighten it up a bit. But this is a .177 caliber version. My dad would have bought it either way, regardless what caliber it was. But yeah, this is marked .177 on the barrel right there, and it is in traditional Webley fashion, an barrel over the cylinder. So you pull it forward like this, and that is awkward to do in front of a camera. You pull it forward like that to cock it. Pop in the pellet, seal it up, and fire. This keeps the whole gun size considerably smaller than other air pistols, spring piston air pistols, where you put the barrel in front of the piston. Some of them get to be quite ungainly and huge. I remember seeing the BSA Scorpions and just being overwhelmed at how massive the darn things were. They just, wouldn't fit in the frame. They were just huge. Looked like an air rifle with some bits cut off the end. Whereas a Webley, tucking the barrel above the cylinder, which is something they've been doing since the 1920s. The first generation of this pistol came out in 1924, the Mark I, and they've been making them. They made them right through into the 1980s with the Webley Hurricane, Tempest, and Typhoon, all pistons named after bad weather. But this one is the Webley Senior, and a lot more compact than those later guns, by virtue of the fact that it's a cast or forged steel frame. The other ones used aluminum, little bulkier, but also a lot lighter. So, but yes, this was Webley's fanciest gun for quite a number of years. In their air pistol line, of course, they had rifles too. But yeah, we'll break this down, give it a good inspection and cleaning. It's been a few years since it's been gone over, and we'll see how it looks. So here are the various pieces of the Webley Senior all stripped down, and this is kind of how the whole thing works. If you're not entirely familiar with Webley air pistols, the piston rides backwards, pressured from the spring from the front. This is a fairly tiny spring in some ways, especially compared to air rifle springs. In order to beef things up a bit, it's maybe kind of hard to tell. I'll take a close-up picture of it. This spring uses a flat wire instead of a round wire, and that just increases the amount of steel that's in it and increases its strength by a bit. Why don't all springs use this sort of technique? It does shorten their life a wee bit. So this spring, however, was replaced by my dad. He got a new spring when he got the gun, but that, of course, is a long time ago now. But he hasn't shot it all that much, so I can't imagine it's completely worn out or destroyed yet. But it would be very hard to find a good replacement for that at the moment. This is the piston, and here's Webley showing off here, and this is what your extra money bought you back in the day. A phosphor bronze or copper beryllium, not entirely sure what the makeup is of this, but that is a metal piston ring, which slides inside the very smooth honed bore and provides a tight piston seal without requiring leather or, in later years, a synthetic. Synthetic piston seals, of course, have replaced most other methods, including the very few air guns out there that did use a metal piston rings. But this would have been a more durable, I think, option. I think back in the day it would have lasted longer than leather, or at least that would be the idea anyway. The Webley Senior, according to the price charts that I found, cost about double what a Junior did, and there was the Mark II that was priced in between the two. But they were all very finely made guns. This is a metal forging that's been, you can see the forging marks or casting marks there. Then it's been machined, goodness knows how many times to get it down to this final shape. And there's that batch number again. It's 1660, and the other parts, this says 660 on it, and a couple of other pieces here and there do have the batch number on there. Yeah, there's a 660 on this one as well. This is the trigger guard. Yeah, I got that backwards. No, it definitely does go that way. But yeah, all beautifully made pieces, and yeah, the barrel. I didn't bother taking the linkage out. Didn't really need to. But this barrel, as I said, is marked 177. If you wanted the gun in 22, you just bought a 22 caliber barrel. If you didn't get one with it, they're interchangeable parts. So swap the barrel out isn't too hard. Webley back in the day made their service air rifle that actually had easy swap barrels on them. But the dream of having multiple calibers at your disposal, whether it's for a firearm or even a pellet gun, the problem you run into, of course, is every time you swap it over, you've got a different aiming point. You have to re-sight things in. The breech seal, which sits right up in here, in this instance, is a replacement one that my dad got. That is a proper Webley seal, but it is a synthetic one. The gun originally had a leather one with a brass. A little brass transfer tube right down the center of it. It was looking pretty beaten up when Dad got the gun, and he asked the gunsmith to get him a replacement breech seal, and these are the ones that they were providing at that time. Leather ones, of course, being no doubt obsolete at that point. This is the trigger mechanism, and it holds the piston, of course, from traveling in this direction. So when you cock the gun, the piston goes from being here to being about here, and the sear is what catches on the back side of that, holds all this mighty spring pressure backwards behind it. And then when you pull the trigger, which pivots here, it pulls it down. There's a channel cut in the frame right here, if you can see that little channel there. And this piece, the sear, is what rides in it. So there's a little bit of extra leverage on this piece here through this little toggle link there. It pulls it down. And you can see my dad has polished this quite a bit, try to smooth things out. but the trigger is still fairly stiff on this gun. And I think I may have actually come up with a reason why. This is the trigger return spring, not that piece there. The trigger return spring here, and you can see it's pretty mangled looking. It does have a little pocket for it right there, and that's supposed to ride flat against the underside of that channel there. And I'm thinking what's happening is, over the years, this thing is getting out of position, and to pull the trigger, you're literally pressing up against the side of this, like this, which is not correct. It should just go straight down to the hole, and I can't make it do that right now, even with my fingers, so I'm guessing when it's tucked up in there, it's not working properly. So my hope is to replace it with this spring here. It looks lighter duty, but it should be sufficient to return the trigger. That's its main job. Push the trigger back so that the sear resets properly, otherwise it'll just flop around and you won't be able to cock the gun properly. So my hope is to get that in there and provide a better trigger pull. So all the other parts look in pretty good condition though, so I shouldn't be too much of a trouble. The other interesting piece on this gun is the rear sight assembly. This is the rear sight right here, which, if you saw me take it apart, it travels in this little U-shaped piece right here. Goes up and down like that. And you can see you've got a very square slot there and an oval slot there. So this allows you to move it up and down and side to side on the frame. So that's just your fairly crude method of windage and elevation. You'll loosen the screw off, slide it over a little bit, hope you got the right amount, and tighten it down. No click stops on a gun of this this vintage, but there it is. We're going to clean everything. Well, it's all cleaned. We're going to re-lubricate everything, put it all back together again, and see how the trigger pull fares now with a replacement spring, and see how the velocity works out. And we'll put it over the chronograph and see if it's still a healthy pistol. So with Dad's old gun back together, it seemed appropriate to check it over the chronograph. Started out with the fairly lightweight G-Co wad cutters, and right off the bat found out that the pistol was performing pretty darn well. There aren't that many air pistols even today that will fire 177 pellets in the mid 400s. So yeah, this is a pretty decent performance, and pretty consistent too. The average with the G-Co wad cutters ended up being 453.4 with a spread of only 33 feet per second. So that seemed to be pretty decent. I should point out that I've shot more than a few air rifles that won't shoot with this much power. Given that they've got much larger springs or CO2 cartridges, yeah, this is quite impressive. I also tried the Crossman dome pellets, the ones made in Brazil. They're also quite light, and a little bit more velocity out of these. But I have one bad shot that dropped down to 421. It even sounded odd as it fired, so I'm inclined to think it was an undersized pellet. But that brought the average down to 469.4 feet per second. But the spread from slowest to fastest was 60 feet per second. But if you eliminate that one bad shot, then it's only 18. So yeah, not so bad. Maybe you just have to give the pellets a bit of inspection before putting them in the barrel, I guess. Then I moved on to the RWS Super Mag, which is a wad cutter pellet, but they're 9.3 grains, so a little on the heavier side. And as expected, velocities were a bit lower, right around the 400 mark. In fact, the average turned out to be 405.4. But the extreme spread was only 15, so again, yeah, the gun's responding pretty well. And it certainly shows that even after 60, maybe coming up on 70 years, this gun is still performing really, really well. I took it to the range on a oppressively hot day. Started out at 10 meters, sighted it in on this bigger bullseye target, and started up by using a rest. And I definitely had some troubles with this, trying to find a comfortable, consistent way to hold the gun where it doesn't, where its natural recoil causes it to bounce a bit off the rest, and that was certainly causing some trouble with accuracy. These JSB pellets, for instance, there's even one shot that doesn't even appear in the picture. It went so high. Side to side, not so bad, less than an inch, but you know, definitely high. Definitely a lot of vertical stringing on these. The Super Mag, I had one shot that went crazy high, and again, the gun must have just literally bounced as it fired off the rest. So yeah, I kind of gave up on that idea. Tried one more pellet. Tried the G-Co wad cutters, but again, no real success there either. You can see these two RWS shots were side by side, and it shows its potential there. The gun is decently accurate, just it's hard to shoot well off a rest anyway. So I did what I knew I had to do, and that was shoot this pistol single-handed offhand. Because as far as I can tell, two-handed pistol shooting wasn't invented until sometime in the 1980s, and this gun was made well before then. And if you notice there, the gun recoils just a little bit in the hand. It doesn't bounce as much as it does when I was trying to hold it onto the rest. My first 5 shots, I did have one a little bit low, but just out of the frame. And can see now the gun was now printing to the right and low. So after the first 5 shots, I made some adjustments to the sights, which I thought would bring it in a little bit better, and tried 5 more. So in the next 5, I think the first one I managed to hit somewhere in that the inner rings. Yep, that's more like it. And now my shots are going with a bit of horizontal spread, but decent vertical. So that kind of tells me that my control of the trigger still needs a bit of practice. And again, I think if I practiced a lot with this gun, it would do better and better. But there it is, the Webley Senior, the dreams of many a teenager in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and apparently the dream of collectors nowadays, because while my dad may have only paid $35 for this gun back in the day, you couldn't touch one for probably 10 times that nowadays. Certainly has a bit of a steampunk look to it, very somewhat industrial. Just needs a few copper rivets hammered into it here and there, and it would complete the look. But it's a lovely, compact, precise, well-made gun. It still works after 60, 70 years, and don't know if you could buy anything nowadays that would survive that long. But I'm going to have to give it back to Dad now, so. Anyway, thanks for watching. Kanakar will be back. Consider subscribing.